Ever since Yuri Gagarin made history by being the first ever human to enter space, many believe that human expansion past the limits of the solar system could only be achieved through the unification of humanity. History, however, has never operated in a clean manner, and even this simple ideal would not be necessary. Fate had other plans. While the Second Cold War traced its roots from the end of the First, all the way back to the 1990s, it took the fall of the American giant for the Chinese People's Republic to bare its teeth. Taiwan was conquered, Japan was bombarded into oblivion, and Korea buckled under occupation forces. South Asia fell under the direct or indirect rule of China's communist regime, and Australasia became the last shield of South Asian democracy. Meanwhile, the Republic of India and the European Union became the stalwart defenders of democracy globally, bearing the torch passed down once again as in 2032. Lady Liberty became too busy destroying herself in internal conflict to do much else. For 42 years, the new arms race occurred. Expensive colonies from both sides were established on the Moon and Mars, while the nations raced to exploit the solar system. Africa and the Americas once again became the playground of giants as international chaos once again became the norm. And in 2074, the Nanjing protests shook the world, and the Asian Spring destroyed the regimes once thought supreme over the people. Japan, Korea, China, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore all either fell to internal strife or formed into new democracies. As the Second Cold War ended, and the potential for a third one once again was aborted, the various Cold War dictatorships began to shatter. With the fall of the American state in 2067, the Russian Civil War of 2072, and the formation of the Republic of China in 2076, every major global power was now democratic. Weak, perhaps, unstable for sure, but democratic nevertheless. Because of this, funding for the Cold War totalitarian regimes dried up, and soon countless nations found themselves joining the democratic world once again. Without any non-democratic superpower, the UN slowly grew strength. The world, tired of the Second Cold War, began to demilitarize while various weaker nations continued to democratize. Slowly, military funding across the planet began to lower and lower, while the democratic century began in earnest. In particular, many early on victories in fighting global warming legitimized the UN in the eyes of millions. What accelerated this period of global peace, however, was a wormhole which opened up at the edge of the galaxy, just past Pluto, on February 2nd, 2084. Mere days before, a scientific vessel from the European Union was studying Pluto when a strange artifact was nearly found floating through space. While quite small in of itself, it had an extremely complex computer within it, written with an alien tongue. Its discovery alone sent shockwaves throughout the Earth. While this was the first piece of evidence that alien life existed, the ship's scientists spent multiple days examining it and attempting to translate it, until one sent what was likely an activate command on accident. While the ship itself was left unharmed, the machine began violently vibrating and became electrified, its energy running through it at such intensity that any crew member who touched it was instantly electrocuted. After power of this low intense activation, energy levels spiked and fried various scientific instruments on the ship. Suddenly, the wormhole was there. Courier ships sent from the revitalized UN space program eventually reached the end, and verified that careful travel was possible through the stable wormhole. One of the courier ship's captains, named Philip Grazzani, even convinced his crew to go through the wormhole, referring to their ship as Rogue One in reference to a space film franchise from 100 years ago. They refused orders to return to Earth and commandeered the first ever human vessel to leave the safety of the solar system. While most believed it was suicidal, luck seemed to be on their side. Not only did they make it across unscathed, but they found themselves in the system right next to an untouched continental world, perfect for human habitation. This vast work convinced many across Earth to politically empower the UN in order for all to benefit from these ventures, or in other words, for no nation to be left out. The UN space program quickly began to consolidate the reformed NASA, the globally acclaimed ISRO, known for the first man on Mars, the ESA, which achieved the first ever human colony on the Moon, and the CNSA, known for humanity's first ever colony on Mars. While funding drastically grew from their home countries, many were still racked with internal problems. The scars from the decades-long Second American Civil War remained, and it would take many more years for the United States to recover. Asian Spring caused massive economic decline, and the brief period of China's governmental breakdown led to numerous deaths until the democratic government of Beijing reunified the nation. While the economies of Earth were slowly recovering, the number of religious cults on Earth soon outpaced expectations. Some rose from the desperation of their members, some rose out of the fanaticism and loyalty to follow authoritarian regimes. Many rose from the discovery of the new planet. Their claims were vastly different. from some cults claiming this world to be their holy land, to some cults claiming this somehow meant humanity's ascension over all of existence was divinely guaranteed. The rise would be the first warning signs of the slow radicalization of the vast amounts of people who suffered through the Cold War and civil wars across the planet. The discovery of the New World also had other consequences. The Golden Age humanity didn't know it was entering was greatly accelerated by the planet's existence itself, as consumer confidence in the economy swelled, leading to more investment in economic gambles, and thus, a larger economy. This also saw the rise of the space bubble, one of the biggest scams in human history. This new world did many things before humanity even colonized it, but its biggest effect was that it was seen as an answer to humanity's exhaustion. A new colony, which could bring vast resources to Earth, which could help rebuild the alien economies of the Cold War victors and losers alike, and rebuild hope in a more prosperous humanity. After a couple years, the first Archship Elcano was sent across, naming the first city Port Phillips in honor of the first human commander, though he was privately fired in disgrace for disobeying orders. Various merchant vessels, scientific ships, and eventually mining and colony vessels followed through. While many expected that the wormhole would disappear after the alien artifact fried itself and broke on December 7th, 2086, with only one Archship so far getting through and a couple minor ships as well. This didn't seem to be the case, and the wormhole remained a stable route to the New World still fairly untouched. The only problem, however, was that the direct communications between them weren't strong enough to cross the wormhole. Slow courier ships would be necessary for any real communication. This would see the establishment of the buoy system, where two small stations existed on both sides of the wormhole. Slowly, they became major points of supply, transport, and communication. By the 20th anniversary of the Phillips journey, however, something began to change. While Port Phillips slowly became less of a city and more of a country, and has continued to be the largest industrial hub within its democratic century, the other side of the wormhole began to intensify. Fewer and fewer courier ships were able to make it through with deliveries of information and communications, with many disappearing, and the few who did make it were always confirmed to be heavily damaged. The decline and stability of the wormhole also saw the buoys get pulled further and further away from the wormhole, lengthening information delays. Because of the UN's extensive communication delays and mishaps at Port Phillips, it was decided that they be granted statehood as a republic of Port Phillips. While the government was still tied directly to Earth, they would be able to manage local affairs in a democratic manner alongside holding more legitimate local elections, unconcerned about Earthian politics. It was also decided that sturdier ships would be built to go across the wormhole, and these armor advancement efforts eventually would become the backbone of the UN's military branch of the space agency. The UN also decided to downplay concerns about the wormhole. Any talk of the wormhole breaking down was muzzled, while efforts to restabilize the wormhole and study the broken down artifact the past we created were doubled down upon. While various independent news became concerned of it, no alarms were sounded yet. 26 years after the anniversary, suddenly all ships from Earth stopped. Port Phillips' democratic government sent vessels to investigate, but none ever arrived to Earth nor back to Port Phillips. Without any diplomatic ties, the people began to panic that either Earth destroyed itself or fell apart, or perhaps even that the wormhole is failing. And the government began to fall into anarchy, not designed to be independent from Earth's governance. The government floundered on how to respond. While the main port city was eventually seized by the military and police under martial law, much of the rural planet became lawless lands, with smaller towns and cities banding together in their local areas in order to survive. While to Phillips, the lack of communication was clearly devastating, the Earth assumed that they simply stopped sending communications. Believing this to be a political statement, Earth debated on whether military action should be taken or if the status quo should be left. They also sent some exploratory vessels to check up upon them, but none ever returned. Port Phillips became secondary to global politics after the Mora nuclear power plant released vast poisonous clouds all across Scandinavia, Europe, and even reaching North America. What was known as 2-9 would be remembered for decades, for American terrorists purposely unleashed the plant across Europe, claiming that the Silver Legion could have been saved, but that Europe betrayed the American state. This saw the rise of the times of troubles. A 40-year period was in the democratic century, which took place from 2108 to 2148, where political violence and terrorist organizations, often funded by the last remaining non-democratic nations, spread terror across the planet. Communist attacks in Asia, religious attacks in the Middle East, fascist attacks in North America, on top of numerous ethnic separatists and terrorists. The UN began to struggle to respond to the chaos, and multiple instances of major democratic nations pulling funding greatly weakened their leadership. The UN Space Agency also began to suffer from defunding as different national agencies began reasserting themselves, and the lack of a united response to Port Phillips left much of the planet in the dark of what was truly going on. Without said uniform response, The Ark ship program was fractured but continued, and over the years the various built ships sat docked, waiting for confirmation that the route was safe, until in 2113, a single vessel returned promising that Port Phillips was on the other side. This would be known as the Great Lie. Pablo Grazzani, the son of Philip Grazzani, believed that the wormhole had become so unstable that anyone sent through would be killed. Instead of going through on military orders, the UNE Horizon under him hit around Pluto and waited many months before returning from the wormhole. The anarchy in the UN distracted the brightest minds of the nation, and when the report was given, it was taken at face value that yes, the wormhole is still secure and that soon communications will return to normal. Though the major players of the UN understood that the report was shaky, the times of troubles got worse with the recent recession, and it led to a political climate which fomented a desperate need for a win. Not everyone in the UN was clamoring for good news yet to their people, and this allowed the UN a political edge in restoring hope. For now. Though many argued that more verification was needed, those who opposed the action politically were shamed and often ousted from public offices. The news organizations which covered the topic were looked down upon. Alongside the various Ark ships built, it was decided that perhaps Port Phillips itself would finally be able to restore communications once the first modern Ark ship went through, with new communication technology more adept to the wormhole's instabilities. Something to note about these Ark ships are the scale. Because of the size of Port Phillips, and the hope that other colonizable worlds would be nearby, most Ark ships were prepared for short journeys but had plenty of infrastructure on board to assist in the landings upon Port Phillips' wild territories. In total, there were millions in the various ships, and those properly prepared likely could survive for years. On top of that, because of the undeveloped nature of Port Phillips, most of these ships had both the impoverished and those prepared for planetary colonization, compared to the many smaller ships which went to the other side expecting to quickly settle in the urban areas of the planet. Because these ships had been held up for years, they all eagerly took off, most leaving the solar system within the year. 4 more years saw in total around 17 Ark ships and dozens of smaller colony vessels, merchant vessels, independent colony ships going through, while lackluster reports from the other side were often ignored in trade for covering the time of the troubles at home. On June 11th, 2117, some members of the UNE Horizon would eventually crack and confess during an investigation, leading to the crew's execution for the presumed deaths of the several million who went through aboard the various Ark ships. While they stopped sending vessels soon after, pulling for around 34 years after the wormhole opened, the wormhole would soon collapse in another 6, blocking their chance to regain communications with any of the lost Ark ships. The fact that the Ark ships were sent through with little confirmation of as one ship caused the worst political crisis it has ever seen since the unification day. The times of troubles got to its worst now. Though the first couple of Ark ships could have been justifiable, the lack of ships returning should have forced the UN and other governments to pause all efforts, yet the various countries purposely slid this under the rug because they were too deep in. This, in of itself, both weakened the trust in the UN Space Agency and the UN itself, and caused numerous governmental collapses and calls for elections, where numerous powerful parties established for decades fractured, and dozens of major leaders were voted out of office. June 11th, 2117 became an important date in the evolution of the UNE. Before that day, the UN was a conglomeration of various modern republics, corrupt democracies, and loosely authoritarian states. Enforcement of democratic values and total equality was a losing battle in much of the world, and the massive explosion of population growth following the world peace was being contained by the massive demand for people on the Ark ships, while the times of troubles impeded any necessary reforms. After the lie was revealed, however, many of these corrupt parties and systems imploded due to protests, violence, party collapses, etc. Reformation movements sprung up all across the planet. Various laws and ethics previously ignored became strengthened and enforced, and the chaos that and broken trust was in the various nation-states from the populace eventually gained strength to reform the UN into the UNE, where the UNE became the forefront organization which cracked down on non-democratic values. While on Earth the news that the 17 or so Ark ships since who all died was a given, the reality was much more complex. This wormhole wasn't just a one-way road. It also gave different roads to each ship. Many now theorize that the machine made a strange wormhole using some form of interdimensional connections to the various seemingly violent tears in space that popped up across the galaxy, hijacking their routes for their own use. No one knows if these tears grew alongside the wormhole, or perhaps they were around even before. The machine, sadly, is too broken to be studied anymore, especially after the 21-23 terrorist attack by Islamic fanatics who destroyed the artifact, believing that it would be against their god's wishes to rebuild it. What was eventually discovered, however, was that all the Ark ships and smaller colonial vessels were strewn across the galaxy. Countless of these vessels were destroyed, some lost all fleet capabilities and were lost eventually into the darkness of space, unable to change course. Some ships had such violent chaos break out, internal or external, that they became floating graveyards. Some merely just disappeared, never to be heard of again from any record or living being. What could be recognized, however, is that around 60% of these ships survived the journey and found a safe haven meant for human habitation or not. What also is recognized is that after an arc ship ventured through a wormhole to the darkness of space, many smaller vessels who ended up on similar corners of the galaxy did their best to try and find these larger ones, and survived or died, depending on the fates of these larger colony ships. Now humanity was scattered across the stars. An entire galaxy, presumably empty of alien life, suddenly found itself the home of numerous human colonies, and as the time of trouble and news died down, as the democratic century came to an end, and the UNE became a central authority to rule over Earth, many within the UNE sought to explore the galaxy, well under the belief that humanity was officially unified. Meanwhile, the various surviving arc ships, colony ships, and the colony of Port Phillips all would lay the groundwork for numerous human factions that would be born across the stars. The survival of their colonies each came at horrible costs, and differing ideologies built in order to survive and began to clash after 2200. But with that, the dawn of humanity's chapter in the galaxy began.